Intersection Magazine Podcast.
Welcome to Intersection Magazine Podcast. This week, I'm privileged to have Dr. McLean Sibanda. If you were with us last year, you remember we talked about his book, Nuts and Bolts, which was really a conversation about his work in the Innovation Hub in Gauteng. And I'm privileged for the opportunity to meet with him again, this time to discuss his second book, Footprints, which really talks about intellectual property, and economic development. And so really thrilled to have him. We hope you will enjoy this episode. In terms of structure, we're going to split it up into the sections of the book that he covered in the writing of this book. And we hope that you will understand the importance of this work, discussions about how South Africa has leveraged its position to gain from the intellectual property of its citizens, and what they've had to do in terms of integrating public funding and research, the use of innovation funds, building capacity, whether that means training young people, creating an environment where the curriculum itself is designed to be very specific, to take into consideration, for example, the mining sector, in the global conditions, areas of potential such as biotechnology, regional agreements that have been put in place, and how South Africa has adapted its own laws to these regional laws. And so we hope you will understand and appreciate the content, the research, the time, the work that has been done by Dr. McLean Sibanda and some of the people that I mentioned in the book. So I actually have a copy of Nuts and Bolts as well as Footprints. They're must-haves. If you're building a fund, if you're into research, if you're an educator, if you're in government, you need to be able to have a guide with you to help you plan, to help you develop policy, to help you create connections with people that are in key positions, to be able to advise government, to understand the structure of the country, to plan, because we need to be in a position where we're planning 10, 20, 30 years ahead. So welcome to this episode. So Dr. Sibanda, thank you so much for meeting with me again. So let's talk about your book, Footprints. Tell us about the first chapter. I suppose it was a discussion about intellectual property in general and your journey into this area, and some of the significant moments that were in this book.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Nicholas, for once more having me on your podcast now to discuss my latest book, Footprints. So Footprints is a book that was written to demystify intellectual property, but also as a roadmap for policymakers that are dealing with intellectual property issues, particularly in the African continent, and also looking at building capacity in respect of of intellectual property management. And lastly, by demystifying it, is really a tool for startup founders, people in corporate that just need to understand what is intellectual property, what are the different aspects, and how do they differ. And also to avoid people saying that I want to, patent my trademark, understanding that those are different, terms. So when one looks at how the book is laid out in terms of part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 1 is really why bother with intellectual property. Chapter 1, takes the journey of looking at intellectual property as in terms of being a development economic construct. It's an economic construct. It's not a legal construct, and that I'm hoping that that comes across in terms of this particular chapter of why bother with intellectual property. And there's Thomas Friedman, who wrote the book The World is Flat, actually says that if you are in the business of selling anything, whether it's music, words, pharmaceuticals, and you're not worried about protecting your intellectual property, then you're not paying attention. So chapter 1, in essence, just lays down, the foundation. And then, chapter 2, deals then with demystifying it. And here I deal with the concepts of what is a patent, what is trademark, what is design, etc.
Okay. Tell us about the significance of the transition that took place with South Africa's history, and how some of that affected the views and the changes that needed to take place in terms of policy and on the legal frameworks between the time of apartheid and then post 1994.
So you'd recall that pre-1994 there was a lot of segregation in South Africa. Blacks were not allowed to do certain things. They were not allowed to work in certain professions, so a new government comes in 1994 and has to build an inclusive economy, and building that inclusive economy meant, in essence, looking at right across the different spheres of the economy and saying, do we have these skills? Do the skills represent the race and gender diversity of the country? And indeed, South Africa did not have that. And also the science and technology and innovation policy that existed pre-1994 was there to serve an apartheid state, which had been excluded by the rest of the world. So it was not inclusive. And so when we look at 1994 and we go to 1996, the very first white paper on science and technology comes out, and it seeks to drive inclusivity. And amongst that, in the white paper, it also talks about the issues of intellectual property, the need to build skills. And so you'd recall, in the book, I talk about, qualifying as the first Black African patent attorney in South Africa. And that was in 2003. And this is, quite a while after independence. So, there's a lot of things that had to be addressed. And, part 2 of Footprints does deal with how we then set about to correct some of these injustices of the past.
Okay. I also read about, of course, your role in making changes in terms of the structures and the system that already existed for learning, for partnerships with, for example, law firms. Tell us a little bit more about that and what went into the changes that you made that made it possible for young people that were just graduating, that wanted to get into the law, and maybe the room you created for them after your experiences in 2003.
Yeah, so I joined the legal profession in 2001. In essence, I joined Adams and Adams, one of the leading firms. And there were not black patent attorneys at the time. And part of the curiosity that drew me to the patent attorney firm in profession was to actually understand why. And during that time, started to understand the context and the difficulty and the challenges. And by the time I left the private sector to go back, to go to government, which was the Innovation Fund, I had understood the challenges, and at the Innovation Fund, there was an opportunity to really contribute towards capacity development. And because of the relationships that we had built in private sector, it was easy for us to then introduce a program to train black patent attorneys and also work collaboratively with the law firms to place them at the law firms for them to do their articles of clerkship. And some of those that were trained have now spun out their own patent attorney firms, and others are working in government, others are now working at university technology transfer offices, and others are working in the private sector. So I think it was really one of those things of saying, how do we create more spaces, for others, and how do we, in essence, make sure that we can, pay it forward, for other people.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that stood out in the book was some of the challenges you faced when there were different, I think you could call them officers, that were presenting their positions. Was it about the times when you were putting together a policy, when the officers would clash between different, I suppose you'd call them technocrats, or just tell us a little bit more about that and how you dealt with that.
So the challenge about government, quite often is that you have different ministries, different government departments. You have officials that often want to protect their own turf. And in this particular case, in the book, I deal about the conflict and the tension between the Department of Science and Technology and the Department of Trade and Industry. Whereas the Department of Trade and Industry in South Africa is the one that is charged with the issues of intellectual property. The Department of Science and Technology was in essence charged with the science and technology agenda and the universities and their fund research. And therefore the sphere of intellectual property in terms arising from research being undertaken at universities is really something that falls within the sphere of trade of science and technology. And during that time, as we're passing the law that is now in existence, the trade and industry felt that it was their own turf. Fortunately, we had good leadership in the Minister Musibuni Mangena, that provided, good guidance and helped us to navigate those difficult terrains. And also a DG, Film Joha, and the DDG that I reported to, which is in the context of East Africa, Deputy, PS, and they were able to help us navigate those particular, landscapes, and it became a trade-off, but it eventually worked for the betterment of the continent.
Okay. Now, could you highlight a little bit about the importance of publicly funded research?
So publicly funded research is very important because if one looks at universities, universities are the biggest concentration of knowledge workers in any country. Yes, private sector does some research, but that private sector research often is just directed to what is of interest to that private sector or industry. Whereas public sector lays a foundation in terms of basic fundamental research, which are the building blocks for applied research. And therefore it's important to, first of all, to get it well funded, and then secondly, to then manage the intellectual property, and thirdly, to assist in terms of the commercialization or utilization of that intellectual property. Unfortunately, in many countries in Africa, number one, it's not well funded. And secondly, there isn't a framework or legal regime to manage that intellectual property that arises from publicly financed research. And that's really what Footprints, deals with. And then the third part is commercializing, that particular intellectual property. And in the later chapters of Footprints, I deal with that, where we then started to put in place offices of technology transfer at universities to allow for commercialization of the research.
Then I also noticed that you talked about some of the benchmarking that took place in the US, Canada, and India. Was there any specific reason why you felt, as a person responsible for your work in South Africa, that those countries were important?
Well, one of the things that is quite important when developing legal frameworks or any framework is context. So it's not a plug and play. What happens in the US cannot be just plugged and played in Uganda. So benchmarking is important, and when one does benchmarking, you're looking for similar type of context, and also you're trying to understand what did not work. So we chose the US because the US, in essence, has been the leader in terms of publicly funded research. From 1980, when the Bayh-Dole legislation was passed, we looked at India because India provided a similar development context to South Africa, a developing country that was also colonized and coming out of the ranks. We looked at Canada, largely because Canada had a system that had failed in terms of managing intellectual property. We looked at Brazil. Brazil was somehow similar context, to South Africa. But ultimately, having looked at all of those, we then came back and said, what is unique to South Africa? And so, for example, South Africa, the biggest funding for research comes from government. But if you look at Uganda, probably that's not the case. You probably find that the biggest funding comes from donor organizations, and so forth. And therefore, the context will be slightly different, but the principles, which are in essence elaborated on in Footprints, will be the same.
Okay. One last section I wanted to ask you about was about regional laws and agreements. For example, South Africa with SADC, and then the East Africa Community, and then with the West African states, and then the African Union. What exists in terms of laws and policies regarding intellectual property, and how do you harmonize what exists in South Africa to what exists in Africa?
Yeah, that's a very important question. In the book, I deal with the regional framework for managing intellectual property in SADC. So in SADC, there is this framework that has been led, and it comes from the SADC IP protocol. So there's a protocol from SADC. In East Africa, there's a protocol as well in terms of intellectual property. Now, those protocols, the key thing is that they have to recognize it's a principle of variable geometry, which means that we recognize that although we are all part of the East African community or SADC, we are at different stages of development. And therefore, some of those principles or laws in these regional frameworks may not necessarily need to be applied to the same extent in each of the countries. And we see that in terms of the trade-related aspects of intellectual property agreement, which is TRIPS, where it has transitional periods and transitional measures to allow other countries to catch up to a level of development that is acceptable.
Very good. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed reading your book. Can you tell us a little bit how can people get a copy of your book, Footprints as well as Nuts and Bolts? Because I think I can't have one without the other. I keep referring to Nuts and Bolts when I'm thinking about what we need to do for innovation hubs in Uganda and of course for Africa. But tell us a little bit about how people can get your book.
So both copies are available, digital copies are available on Amazon, So you can type in footprints, McLean Sibanda, intellectual property. It should come up on Amazon. Similarly, nuts and bolts, Sibanda, innovation. If you type that on Amazon, you should be able to access digital copies. As far as hard copies are concerned, you can go to my website, which is sibandalegacy.africa. So SIBANDA legacy.africa. And there is a store there, otherwise a message. I'm also available on social media, on X, former Twitter. We search by my name, so my username is McLean Sibanda, MCLEAN Sibanda, and also on LinkedIn, and that way we can then arrange for the copies in country.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. Hope to meet again and maybe discuss probably another book.
Who knows? There's possibly another book in the making. But thank you very much. I really enjoyed chatting to you, and I think Africa is really poised for a lot of growth. The youth in Africa are doing amazing things, and we need to focus on developing solutions to address the myriad of challenges that we face as a people, because no one is going to come and save us. So thank you very much, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much.